In John chapter 8, verse 31 and 32, this was my meditation this morning. Jesus was saying to those Jews who had believed him, if you continue in my word, then you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free. And we are so privileged to be on the receiving end of the truth. We are so privileged to be counted among those whom the Lord would call or deem his disciples. And as such, we are the free ones. Isn't that a glorious truth? And he goes on to say, if the Son makes you free, you'll be free indeed. Thank you, Lord Jesus Christ, for that. So, again, welcome. I'd like to have Pete go around. He's got a microphone here. So if you're a guest or a first time, this is your first time here, please stand up. I know Jason is a guest here. Please introduce yourself. Tell us what you do while you're here.
Jason Rogers, Primerica Financial Services. I do financial coaching, do financial literacy, teach people how money works, set them up for retirement, and help them be able to stay and retire, make their money last, and teach people how to get out of debt. And we do missions work and live in Fort Myers, Florida, and work nationwide. And son-in-law of T.L. Hart.
And he came up just for the meeting today, so.
Team building, excited here. Yeah. Guys.
Robert Glennon, associate broker with Keller Williams Realty. I work in both commercial and residential real estate and try to make my clients' lives easier by helping them make sensible, informed real estate decisions. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jake Haig, and I own a call center selling insurance products. So, a lot of life insurance sales, so everyone's favorite topic to talk about. This is my wife and my little daughter, Delphine and Elisha. So.
Anyone else? Wonderful. We're so pleased to have you, and I want to welcome you personally, to the King's Group. The King's Group is all about furthering or advancing God's kingdom in and through the marketplace. And all of us, whether we work at a job as an employee or we work for ourselves, and we associate with vendors and suppliers and, of course, customers, or if we have employees, we all have this sphere of influence. And God has called us to influence others for his kingdom, both from an internal standpoint and an external standpoint. And I'm really excited about what we're going to be doing in the months coming up, because we're going to be talking about Christ in the workplace. We'll be spending a few months about talking about what that looks like, and then we're going to move from there as far as Christ in the marketplace. What that looks like. What I'm really excited about coming up, actually next month, is Ray Tadgerson's going to be back with us. And, I don't want to give away what he's going to be talking about, but Ray, I think I'm going to title this on our events page, God at Work. Because God worked, obviously, as ambassadors of Christ, it's all about the gospel and getting people to come to know the Lord and to get their sins forgiven, to be freed from sin and what have you. But God also has us to be culture shapers, to shape the society that we work in, to influence the business arena, if you will. And God uses people to do that. And God used Ray in an extraordinary way, not just to bring Christ to his workplace or the marketplace, but to impact the whole region for good. In fact, probably some of us here would not be able to be in business if it weren't for what God did through Ray. Back, I don't remember what years it was, but he's going to tell the story about how God used him to change the climate, if you will, the whole business sphere of not only Greater Lansing, but the whole region. So that'll be exciting. And then in September, along the lines of Christ in the workplace, we're going to be talking about business as a mission. And I'm super excited about that. I just finished reading a book by the same name, and it really gets into what it looks like Christ in the marketplace. But one interesting thing about this gentleman who wrote the book is that his firm has begun about 300 micro enterprises around the world in 17 different countries. And so there's a local application to business as mission, but there's also this missionary thrust that's new, relatively new in the area of missions, where you have business is the outpost, if you will, as mission. So we'll be getting into that in September, October, November. November, Dr. Jungi is going to be here. He's an amazing man, as many as you know, but he runs a really amazing organization. He's a chiropractor, nutritionist, and he has a couple of locations. And if you go there and you have any drift at all, you'll see how he brings Christ in to that environment. So we'll be doing that. In late September, Roger Bassett will be talking with us via workshop. This will be probably on a Tuesday or Thursday evening about understanding financial statements. And you've heard me talk about that the last couple of times as I've announced it. And you really need to learn, if you don't already, you need to learn how to compile financial statements. And if you have somebody doing that for you, how to read and understand them and manage by them. It's critical. So we're going to be talking about that via a workshop in September. And then in November, it's our intent to have another workshop on how to start your own business. And of course, most of you are already in a business, but we'll be opening up to the church and to people outside of the church as well. So anyway, and I just want to remind you, the first Saturday of every month, we do have our first council. It's a prayer council. We meet from 9:15 to 10 in the missions boardroom here at the church. And basically during that time, we're going through every business and every person that's listed as a King's Group member, every business representative. We're going through and praying for individual people and companies and firms represented in the King's Group, as well as our thrust in the marketplace. So with that, I'd like to introduce a very special guest. I think you all know Roger Bassett, who's going to be working with us today on team building, but I don't believe you know his wife, and that's Chris. So I'd like to invite Chris Bassett up, please. Chris is an ordained AG minister. Do I have that right? And she's a phenomenal lady. I've learned about her from Roger, my time spent with Roger, but let's all welcome Chris.
Thanks, Terry. I get to come and see what he does once a month and who he hangs out with. I'm here to introduce Roger, and I know many of you know him already, and you know about the many degrees that he holds and the experience of over 40 years that he has in leadership in businesses in the metals industry. And that's all well and good, but I'm here to introduce you to Roger the man. Probably the most important characteristic of a good leader is integrity. And I have known Roger for over 50 years now, and I know that he always operates with the utmost integrity, both in business and in his private life. So I'd like to share with you just a short story about how significantly that was illustrated when he retired from his last full-time job. On his last day in the office, he had arranged to have lunch with me, to meet me for lunch. And he was getting up around noon, leaving his desk to come out and meet me. And the human resources director marched into his office and said, "So where do you think you're going then?" And he was a little bit taken aback, and he sat down rather suddenly and wondered what was going on. The next thing he knew, a lady came into his office with a huge vase. I mean, it's like this size, with one long-stemmed rose in it. And she shook his hand and she wished him a happy retirement. Now, I should tell you that in this company of about 300 employees at this location, there were about 50 women that worked there, and they didn't all work in the offices. A lot of them worked right side by side with the men in the factory. And Roger always has made it his business to know everyone who works for him and interact with them and get to know them. So these ladies knew him and they knew that he was retiring. So as he's puzzling over this rose in the vase, another lady came in with another rose and put it in the vase and wished him a happy retirement. So he's kind of shaking his head, and then in comes another and another. So he peeped around the corner of his door and looked out down the hall, and there were all 50-odd ladies in a line, all carrying red roses, well, not red, but long-stem roses. And each one came and added it to the bouquet. So at the end of the time, he had an enormous bouquet of roses. What a tribute to a man who has always operated with the utmost integrity, respect, and honor in the workplace. And I couldn't think of a better way to honor him on his retirement. These ladies obviously felt valued and respected by him, and they wanted to show him that. So with that, I introduce my amazing husband, Roger.
Thanks to Chris for that. She's the love of my life, just in case you didn't know, for that kind introduction. If I may, and I know Terry prayed, but I'd like to just start with a quick word of prayer to ask the Lord to help us with our meeting today. So let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for providing the opportunity to meet together to discuss the topic of team building. We ask that you bless our thoughts, our words, and our activities today, and that our work here enables us to serve your kingdom better. We pray this in the name of your precious Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. On the whiteboard, I'm kind of old-fashioned, so I scribble on whiteboards and then have to cross it out. There's a summary of what hopefully the next couple of hours is going to take us through. I have a group activity which I'll explain in a minute, which will take probably 20 minutes to half an hour in total. And then you probably, some of you may go to sleep, and that's okay, but I've got about a 45 to 50 minute kind of dissertation about what I believe to be the 6 characteristics of fundamentally successful teams. And then what I'd like to do then is to go back to the results that we get out of this group activity that we're going to start with and discuss those results at the end in closing in the light of, hopefully, in the light of what we've learned by discussing the 6 characteristics. So the group activity is called the red-black game. And before we do that, I have to ask, have any of you done that game before? Anybody done the red-black team building game before? Because if you have, there's a bit of a trick to it. So if you have, it's better that you abstain from the activity, because once you've done it once, you kind of know the solution. Okay, that's great. So none of you have done that. What I'd like to do is divide the room up into approximately into 2 groups. They don't have to be exactly the same number. And probably I'm thinking the most practical way to do it would be to take these 3 tables here directly in front of me and make you one group, and then the 3 tables on this side and make you another group. The activity involves 6 decisions, sequentially, one after another, and it kind of goes like this. Just for the sake of keeping a record, we'll call this group Team A, and we'll call this group the B group. The thing that you have to do, and I'll sort of release you, you guys can actually go into the room opposite the youth room to discuss your strategy. But the way it works is this. You have 2 minutes, and we'll repeat this process 6 times, but you have basically 2 minutes to make a decision as to whether you're going to vote red or black. The rules are like this. If both teams vote black, each team gets 1 point. If one of the teams votes red, they get a point, but the other team loses a point. So if both teams vote red, both teams lose. But you have an opportunity to take a point off the other group if you vote, one votes red and one votes black. So the object of the game is to collectively, for the whole room, maximize the number of points that you get after doing this 6 times. Sorry? If they both vote red, then they both lose a point. So you could end up with a negative score if you choose that. So what I'd like to do, and Chris is going to, what I ask you to do is to come up with a spokesperson. But this group, if you could go over there, and you've only got 2 to 3 minutes, and Chris will be the timing monitor. So if you guys could go over there and decide whether or not you're going to vote black or red.
So what are we deciding?
You're deciding on whether you will say black or red. And this group can kind of collectively muse among yourselves. And you got 2 minutes to decide. No, you don't need it. You only have 2 minutes. right, so we'll pick this up again. Is there, you can see the results. Both groups voted black every time, so each group gained 1 point for themselves, and they did not take the more aggressive approach of taking the result, vote in red, which basically meant take a point for yourself, but take away the point for the other group. It's interesting because if you Google this game, you will see that the people that run it will say this never happens. And in the secular world, it probably doesn't. And this is a really, really interesting result. And it's probably the only kind of result that a group of Christians could come up with. Because, let's discuss this. Is there any way that you could manipulate the red and the black on either side and get more than 12 points for the total? No. Right. So, I wasn't privy to much of a conversation over there, so forgive me for that, but the conversation here worked out very, very quickly that if the goal of the exercise is to maximize the number of points for the entire team, for the entire group, then there is only one way to vote. Yeah, same discussion? Yeah. Literally, more than 9 times out of 10, probably 99 times out of 100, if you do this with a group of secular business people, you get lots of reds. Because they are absolutely bound by, I'm going to be better than him, or she's going to be better than her, or however it goes. So this is a really good, wholesome result from, and obviously my son Jeff is doing a great job of keeping the Christian ethic alive here. So, this makes the discussion at the end a little more pertinent, actually. But what I'd like to do now is go through what I believe to be the 6 essential features of successful teams. And the first of those may surprise you, because I guess this is sort of my version. There's lots of books. There are literally thousands of books that you can buy and read about team building, all the way from sports coaching to business coaching and everywhere else. But my view, and it's not only my view, I guess, but the view that I subscribe to say there are 6 essential features, essentially comes from what we know in the Bible. Because if you think about it, it's not much of an intellectual leap to suggest that Jesus was probably one of, or maybe the best team leader that has ever existed. You think about it in just secular terms. Jesus developed a team whose purposes and functions not only continue today, 2,000 years later, but he's also self-sustaining. We rely on Jesus because we pray to him every day, and he is the strength that provides us as Christians with our team ability. Thank you. I'm going to need that. So the first essential requirement of a good team is leadership. Now, what does that necessarily mean in terms of teams? Well, as Chris already pointed out, a good leader is a person of integrity. And that doesn't necessarily mean anything in a sense of the modern world, but it means a person that keeps his word. Keeping your word is probably rare in secular business and in the world today generally. People weasel out of commitments that they've made because they weren't legitimate, they didn't think they were legitimate commitments. And you don't have to go much further than the marriage statistics in this country to figure that out, because more than 50% of marriages result in divorce. And having been married to my beautiful wife, the love of my life for 47 years, I can't conceive of how you could make a commitment like that and then walk away from it. But people do. So integrity is important. The second requirement is of a good leader is somebody who is prepared to work hard to make other people shine. To somebody who has a real desire for others to grow. In the business world and in textbooks and all that sort of stuff, words like delegation, risk, training, and all those kind of things come to mind. But essentially, the characteristic that is, I believe, essential in a leader who is part of the team building process is somebody who is indeed prepared to allow other people to grow. We could spend the whole university term just talking about that concept. How do you allow people in your organization or in your team to grow? Third, I believe that a good leader is a person who is fair. I originally kind of wrote in my notes fair dealing, but I think it's more than just fair dealing. I think it's a person that is fair, a person that has the ability to weigh seemingly opposite kind of requirements and come up with a solution which is beneficial to all parties concerned. The fourth requirement, in my view, of a good leader is a person who prays and asks God for his guidance. You don't have to go very far away from the Bible, or you go into the Bible. When Jesus Jesus prayed a lot. Now you think about that, you know. Technically, I guess part of our belief in the Trinity would say he's praying to himself, but he prayed. And he prayed on a number of occasions, and in the team building context, before he decided, or as he was deciding, to help him decide who the disciple should be, as he was choosing his team, the Bible tells us very clearly that he went to a quiet place and prayed. So you think about this, the Son of God, part of the Trinity, however you theologically kind of put that together, if he felt the need to pray before he made a decision about building his team, boy, I'd say we need a lot more prayer. And I think prayer is a very, very key ingredient to leadership in general, but in the context of leading and choosing a team, I think you don't go any further than Jesus himself, because he felt the need to pray. So who would we be saying, well, we can do this without prayer? If Jesus needed prayer, I think we need prayer. The final kind of in the context of team building, the final piece that I believe is essential for a leader to be a good team builder is to be a person who possesses discernment. I was privileged to meet with some of the Mount Hope Leadership School folks a couple of months ago. And one of the questions they had was, if you're running a business and you're trying to choose between things, and the expression that was used was interesting because I'd never really heard it before, but the person said, I've got all these things and I need to figure out which one is the most shiny. And are the shiny ones the ones that I really need to go with in my business? And it's a question of having a leader who can help you with that choice. Because the shiny things aren't always the things that are the things you should pursue to be helpful. So the second feature that I believe is essential in team building is a common purpose. As Christians, Jesus was very careful to make it abundantly clear what our common purpose is. The Great Commission. There's no equivocation about what he meant. And the fact that it was, Jeff might correct my theology, but if it wasn't the last thing he said to us before he went to heaven, it was pretty close to the last thing that he said before he ascended to the Father. Go and tell the world. Go and preach the gospel. Go and tell people about Jesus' sacrifice. No question that Jesus did a great job and does a great job continuing by making it really, really clear that our purpose on earth as Christians is to follow the Great Commission, to do something that helps other people who haven't been introduced to Jesus be introduced to him and ultimately be saved. You put that in the context of team building in the secular world. There are a few things that come out from that consideration. One is, Jeff is our missions pastor. He refers to the Great Commission a lot. In other words, we're reminded, either by reading the Bible, listening to Jeff, listening to people like him, it's not something that is said once and sort of written down and, oh yeah, okay, and you forget about it. It's repeated over and over and over again. And my admonition to you is to say, when you're building a team as the leader and having established the common purpose, you cannot over-communicate the common purpose. It is impossible to over-communicate the common purpose. You must communicate it over and over and over again. I have some examples from the secular world. When I was president of Plymouth Steel, we put together essentially a card which has our basic values, our core priorities, and our operating philosophies on a little card. Pretty hokey. Our basic values were be truthful, communicate information, good or bad, immediately, keep your word, be respectful of others, and follow up. I won't bore you with all of this, but our core priorities were customer obsession, quality, safety, and continuous improvement. Now you might say, well, that's good, and that would have been all very well if we'd just written it down, put it on the website, put it on the literature, and got on with our work. We didn't do that because I even at that time, I had this sense that you cannot over-communicate a common purpose. So we had these cards made up. We had them made up in English. We had them made up in Spanish because we had some Spanish speakers. And unfortunately, yesterday my wife will attest that I was going crazy trying to find the Bosnian version of this, which we actually did because we had a number of Bosnians in our organization in one particular plant. And I couldn't find it, I'm afraid. But I need these back because they're the only ones I've got now. But I'll just pass them around. And as I'm passing them around, I'll tell you what we did with them. I used to have, as president of the company, I used to have quarterly meetings with everybody, an entire plant or an entire shift in a plant, and we do it, 3 or 4 times in the day and night, so that everybody got to, and we'd give a business update, where we stand with customers, how the economy is doing, general stuff about how everything's going. At those meetings, I had hundreds of those, and at the first one after we'd printed them, we literally gave one to every person in the organization. Every team member had essentially a written list of our common purpose. And then that wasn't where we stopped, because the next quarterly meeting, I'd ask them, have you got one in your pocket? Because if you haven't, I'll give you another one. And I would do that, and I did that for 10 years, over and over and over again. And we got to the point where when people were trying to make decisions in the organization, practical day-to-day decisions, some of them sometimes would get their values cards out and say, well, okay, if we make the decision this way, are we going against or for some of these values? If we make it that way, are we going against or for some of those values? I'll give you an example. We had one of the core priorities of the organization was customer obsession. We had a very big customer for whom we were producing an urgent order on a particular machine, and that order had to be produced for this big customer within 3 days. The machine started up, ran, well for the first day. Beginning of the second day, the operator said, I need to shut this machine down because it has, there's a safety concern, there's a safety mechanism that isn't working, has stopped working, and we need to figure out, what we're going to do. So they all got together, and at this point they stopped, so immediately the sales guys are all saying, well, you can't stop. Can you run that machine even though you can't, even without this? Is it possible to run this machine without this safety thing? And they said, it's possible, but we're not going to do it. And so you got this tussle between the sales guys that want, this big customer order out, and the manufacturing guys who are saying, no, we're and they got the card, and you'll see this customer obsession, quality, safety, and even some of the sales guys tried to say, well, safety is number 3. Well, it's not. All 4 of them are the same sort of weight. So they ended up in my office, and I said, well, yeah, safety is important to us, and I much though the sales guys didn't like it, I said, I fundamentally agree with the operations folks. We gotta fix this. So how long is it going to take to fix it? 2 weeks. Need this order in 2 days, because we're 3 days and we got one gone already. So at that point, the sales guys had a heart attack, and I said, well, is there any other possible way? So we got on the phone with, we had multiple plants. So we got all the plant managers together on the phone. And we said, we're making this order in the facility in Detroit. Is there any way we can make this order with all the quality requirements and everything else for this customer on any other of the machines that are in our group? And the plant manager in Kentucky said, yeah, I can do that. I have a not exactly identical machine, but it's certainly a sister machine. It's already approved through the quality requirements and everything else for this particular customer. We've never run that particular size for them before, but we run that size for other people, and it is approved and everything else. So the end result was we got all the raw material, which was quite a lot. It was several thousand pounds, several tons, and we trucked it down to Kentucky. Kentucky ran it. They trucked the finished product back to Detroit, and it shipped on time. And the problem was essentially solved. Now you can say, well, it was very fortunate that, and it was very fortuitous that we had one of our 20 or so machines in other locations. But it's not the fact that we were able to do it that I want to illustrate to you. It's the fact that we went through that intellectual kind of process to say, how important are our priorities? And we will not abrogate any of them. And that goes back to making sure that there's a clear communication of a common purpose. Is this making sense? Yes. All right, good. So later on, when I moved to another company, I put our core values on the back of my business card, and that's most companies these days, you will see something on the back of the card in that way. So what happens when you don't clearly communicate, over-communicate, and to the point of it being a nuisance? Oh, here's Roger again with his blue cards. We're going to have a Christmas party. Well, Roger will be there handing out his blue cards, right? Over-communicate the purpose. What's our purpose as Christians? The Great Commission, right? Spread the word. There's a couple of situations in history where the fact that was not over-communicated and over-explained caused a tremendous amount of trouble. How many of you have heard of the Spanish Inquisition? Yeah? The driving force for the Spanish Inquisition was a group of people who were professed, devout, Bible-reading Christians who felt that the way to be Christian was to torture and kill people who didn't have quite the same understanding of the common purpose. Now, if you go back, I understand that it's a fairly twisted way I'm looking at this from a historical point of view. But if you go back to that and you say, if the people in those various factional churches, the Catholics and all the other different versions, if they had, instead of worrying about their own stained glass colours in their cathedrals, or the robes they were wearing, or the Latin words that they were saying, if they over-communicated the common purpose by, ultimately it happened, by having Bibles translated into native languages like English and people understanding, that over-communication could have prevented the tragedy of the Spanish Inquisition. Another one that's a bit closer to home, and I'll mention it briefly because we could spend hours on this subject, is the fact that in America we continued as a country to allow slavery for almost 100 years after, as a group, we'd written the Declaration of Independence, which clearly says everybody's equal. Now, there's only two possibilities there. Either the everybody's equal was not sufficiently well communicated as a common purpose, or it never was a common purpose in the first place. Those are the only two possible explanations for that historical fact. So I know I'm going on about this, but these two things, leadership and common purpose, of the 6 items that I believe are important for team building, you cannot over-communicate the common purpose. The third kind of item is related to common purpose, and it's shared values. I've got the wrong pen here. Number 3, shared values. If we put that in a Christian context, the common purpose is the Great Commission. Go and tell people about Jesus. The shared value would be the fundamental belief that we have in Christians that God created everything, sin came into the world, Jesus came, sacrifice, good for us, or enough for our sin. Similar concepts, but different. The reason you need shared values in a team is simply because if you don't have a group of people with shared values, somebody will stand out as different and start trying to move in a different direction. And that will undo, if you like, the unity that comes from a common purpose. So they're related, but they're slightly different. And I'm hoping that the illustration from a Christian perspective is a reasonable explanation that the shared value that we all have is our belief in God and Jesus and the process. The common purpose is the Great Commission. The fourth point is the team members themselves. Choosing the team members. Very important. And Terry was kind enough to lift some of the information from one of the books that he likes, Good to Great, in the explanation on the website for today's discussion, where there's a concept of get the right people on the bus and then figure out what they're going to do. I humbly, or maybe not so humbly, sort of disagree with that a little bit, because I think it's important to figure out what you're going to do before you put the people on the bus, because they're kind of connected, and I suppose it's a chicken and egg kind of discussion. But it's important to have team members who have a combination of skills, temperament, a willingness to share and put the group first. One of the kind of great enterprises of man in the 13th, 14th, and 15th century in Europe was building cathedrals. It took an average of 100 years each to build what we now know as the great cathedrals of Europe. 100 years. Now, in order to have a team to do that, you needed a fair number of things, but one of the things you needed was team members. And it wasn't just a guy in a robe saying, God, provide me with a cathedral. I mean, we believe that miracles happen, but in practice it took them 100 years to build these cathedrals because they had to go and find a quarry, the source of the stone. They had to bring the stone. They had to get stonemasons to cut the stone to the right shape. They had to have a guy who was a master builder who figured out that you could put the foundations there and the cathedral wouldn't fall over when you got it built right. And then to go with that, you need all the support people to support the builder and the stonemasons. So you need people, you need blacksmiths making tools, you needed carpenters making forms and frames and cutting down trees and all that stuff. You needed people to make the food, everything. You need a whole team of people. And for each cathedral, this process went on for 100 years, so it wasn't necessarily the same people that were at the beginning, because they had a common purpose. Glorify God was the common purpose of building a cathedral. By the way, it wasn't build a cathedral. It was, we want to glorify God, and we'll do this by building a big cathedral. So there's a very strong need in building a team to pick the right members. Think about how Jesus did it. I'll go back to what I said about leadership and a leader that prays. Jesus prayed and said, God, help me make the right decision about the 12 people that I'm going to pick. And he prayed before he picked them. And then he went and picked 12 particular people. And each one of those disciples had a specific purpose, which Jesus must have had in his mind. He must have picked the one who betrayed him. He knew that he was going to betray him just as much as he knew that he should give Simon the fisherman a new name. Cephas in Greek, or Peter as we translate it, meaning the rock. You are the person that I'm going to build my church on. Now it's interesting, and I haven't asked Jeff about this, so I'm probably treading on dangerous ground, but as far as I can see, there's only 3 of the disciples that Jesus gave names to. He gave a specific team name to Peter, because his name was Simon before. And then he gave a name, and I'm going to have trouble finding it in my notes, but he gave a joint name to James and John, the sons of Zebedee. And I can't pronounce the word, but it means sons of thunder. Now, I'm not quite sure what that was, but for some reason, out of the 12, if I'm reading right, Jeff, out of the 12 people, there are only 3 of them that Jesus actually should have gave team nicknames to. Now, I don't know what the significance of that was, but I would hazard a guess that even though there was a certain amount of equality, and there is some talk about who of us is the greatest and all that among the disciples, that Jesus kind of stopped and quelled that stuff pretty quick. But it seems to me that Jesus had a sense of who these people, more than a sense of who these people were, who he wanted them to become, who he wanted them to be. So in picking team members, especially in a business context in the secular world, there are 2 things I would say. First of all, it is the leader's job to pick the team members. It's not there is no question about that. Now, the leader could pick team members, and if you look at the way Jesus' team has evolved, Jesus picked 12 people to be on his intimate initial team. Those 12 people then, each in their own way, spawned or welcomed or invited a bunch of other people, ultimately, to join the team. Most of that went on after the resurrection, after crucifixion and resurrection. But that team was originated by the guy who was the leader, Jesus. The members today, we are, I think most, if not all, the people in this room would count themselves as members of the Christian faith. Now, whether you're a card-carrying member of a particular church group or a particular denomination is interesting from a secular point of view, but it's not as relevant as whether or not you have a personal relationship with the Lord and you have a faith in him as your Savior. That has all come because when he picked those 12 people, he already sensed that those 12 people would be prepared to delegate responsibility of future membership to other people. So Christianity is probably the most well-known and also the most effective self-sustaining team that we've ever seen. There aren't any, I can't think of any, kind of companies or countries or that kind of process that have the same, exactly the same common purpose and shared values that they had, that they were given 2,000 years ago. The fifth thing is resources. Going back to the cathedrals, it's nice that we have in that case, the common purpose was to glorify God. The shared value was if we build a really good cathedral, that will do that. People will see that we're trying to glorify God. You got members, you got stonemasons, builders, carpenters, all those people. But none of those people got any money. So the fifth requirement is resources. And where do those resources come from? They come from God. They're unlimited. And it's interesting that even in the sort of minute piece of history about the building of the cathedrals, ultimately the people that conceived the cathedral to be built, and they knew it would be built 100 years later, finished 100 years later, fundamentally had faith that God would provide the resources to build the cathedral. Because they didn't have everything they needed in year one to get the whole thing done. Maybe they had something to make a start. They had a few people digging and a master builder who said, you can dig these holes and this will be where the foundations are going to go. Go away and do that for 2 years, because that's 2 or 3 years, because that's maybe what it took. And while you're doing that, well, we'll pray. And some Lord comes and says, what are you doing? And they say, well, we're going to build a big cathedral. Oh, I want to be part of that. I got a quarry. Come and use my stone. And so on. So the resources, and Dave Williams obviously did a much, much better job than I could possibly do of explaining that to us at one of our meetings about 6 months ago, when he said, God has infinite resources. An example of that from Dave Williams would be somebody wants water, and one person goes to the Pacific Ocean with a teaspoon, and they take a teaspoon of water and are satisfied because that's what they want, a teaspoon of water. Another guy comes with another great big tanker truck and sucks out a whole bunch of water out of the Pacific Ocean because that's what he wants. Another guy gets a pipe and a pump and keeps pumping and pumping and pumping. And you know, any one of those things don't make any iota of difference to the level of water in the Pacific Ocean. And that was Dave Williams, what I believe to be an excellent example. The analogy is the Pacific Ocean is like God's resources for us. God's resources are unlimited. And so when we talk about resources, whether it's in the Pacific Ocean or whether it's, business resources, if we go back to what I said originally about good leaders pray, God will give you the resources because he has them. They're his resources. They're not ours. They're not ours to create or to make or anything. They're God's. So it all kind of, ultimately comes together. The final feature that I believe is important for good teams is pride. And I know that pride is a sin, right? Pride in membership. Not only do you want the right people on the bus who believe in the common purpose and the shared values, but you want them to be proud that they are members of that team. That's why sports teams have their own logos. That's why in many, many parts of society we have badges. We all have these on today. And I'm not trying to make a strong point about this, but the fact that we've all got these badges on means that we as individuals are proud today to be part of this King's Group meeting, and to show that in a relatively minor way, but nevertheless to show it, we have our badge. It is important, it is vital in my view, that the people in a team are proud to be in that team. And so those are the features that I believe, the 6 features that I believe are essential for building and maintaining a good team. As I said, there are literally thousands of books about team building that have been written by people much smarter than me. And this is a view that is maybe slightly different from what you may have read, but I don't think it's completely out to left field. Finally, I would like to share perhaps a potential negative, and I think in one of the sessions about a year ago, I think I mentioned this in answer to a question from somebody here. What do you do as a leader? You have a responsibility to make sure that your team members really do share the belief in the common purpose, share a belief and support the common purpose, share a belief in the shared values, and also are prepared to be proud of their membership. And certainly in business, you encounter situations where you've chosen a team, the team's kind of going, and all of a sudden there's, I'm afraid I can't remember the author, but there is a business writer who refers to the person that isn't quite on board, but they're not ready to leave of their own volition, as a white rabbit. I can't remember what book that's in, but it's not my original thing. It's in somebody's book. They refer to that person as a white rabbit. And the person that says all the right things in the meetings, but then over a quiet coffee, they sort of deride the organization. It is your job as a team leader to ferret those people out and help them understand that they would really thrive in a different environment than your team. And that is probably the most, not the most, but it's certainly one of the most difficult features of leadership, particularly business leadership, that I've heard people talk about. I know in my own case, over 40 plus years in business, I've obviously hired and unfortunately fired a number of people. I can remember intimately the very first person I fired. It was for a performance issue, very straightforward. I can remember a few of the other folks that I've encouraged to seek opportunities in other environments in which they may thrive better than working in our team. And none of those decisions do I regret. The ones I regret are the ones where, for whatever reason, me being soft, me being talked into something, me not perhaps having all the right information, I gave people who were potentially white rabbits a second and a third chance. There's only a handful of those examples over my 40-year plus career, but every one of them I wish I had fired immediately, instead of giving them a second and a third chance. And my view, honestly, is that a good team needs a leader that has some backbone, and a leader that will clearly sort out and seek out and ferret out the team members who are not quite working for the team. We don't argue about that in sports. We absolutely accept that the coach of the Major League sports team has the absolute right to dismiss a player that he thinks is not cutting it for almost any reason, whether it's on the field or off the field activity. But in business, we seem to think that our hands are tied, that we can't do that. And they'll threaten us with some irrelevant statute. You can't do that because I'm in a category that says you can't do that to me. And we need to be honest with ourselves, but if we have a good and justifiable reason for encouraging a team member to help them find another spot in another organization, you're not doing the organization any favors by hanging on to them. So, I'm hoping that makes some sense. My discussion about my intended discussion about the red-black game came out a bit differently. I've done that both as a participant and as a facilitator dozens of times. I've never had a group where both sides always voted black. So I can congratulate you guys, you can congratulate yourselves. I suppose, when we drive home, my wife will say, well, you were too good at explaining the common purpose. Because part of the trick of that game, and the reason I asked, has anybody played it before, is because you only have to play it once to realize that the best outcome for the whole group is everybody votes black all the time, and you don't take the aggressive step of voting red that could potentially take something off the other group, because we're all in the same team. And so that's the purpose of that game. If you Google the red-black game, you'll likely find, and I have just one that I'll read to you. Every time, and this is not me speaking, this is from a thing that I Googled. Every time I run this exercise, and I've been running it for over 10 years, one of two results occurs. Either both teams play red from the beginning, or they both start black and one of them plays red after 2 or 3 turns. Both sides play red from then on. And this says, I have never seen this game played when either side has ended up with a positive total. Okay? So you are a unique group, and you don't need me to tell you about team building because you already do it. You already understand the fundamental concept of being able to share good fortune. And so the discussion of that game is a little curtailed because I don't need to explain that to you, which is really a credit to you as a group and a credit to each one of you as individuals. Because, as I said, I didn't spend enough time with the group that went over there, but here there was not a lot of debate. There was a lot of, well, this is pretty obvious, you know, this is pretty simple. Yeah. And I would go so far as to say that has a lot to do with our commonly shared value from our faith and our commonly held view that we are, in one way or another, maybe a little bit further along than the secular world in being prepared to share good fortune and good opportunities with other people. And I guess, Terry, that's essentially part of what this group is about anyway. So congratulations to everybody here. So thank you for your time. I could try and take a few questions. I'm not sure whether that, makes any sense, or I just let Terry comments.
Well, my comment is that there was no argument on this side. Not one argument. I've served on public boards, and there's always arguments, and you hear it on TV, politicians arguing. So I like what you said. We're an all like-minded, very calm group here, coming to a uniform decision. The question I have is on the card. It said ABC decision making. I don't know if you spoke about it or I missed it, but if you could just briefly explain what that meant on the card. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I can explain that. That was a kind of a formalized way that I tried to formally delegate responsibility in the organization. We were a fairly large company. And I was struggling with the notion that, we're a fairly large company. We want everybody to be involved in decisions, but obviously everybody can't make the $10 million capital investment decision for us without some structure around that level of decision. So what we came up with, it's not unique. I can't remember what book I got it out of, but it's not my original stuff. What we came up with was A's, B's, and C's. And for each job level, we said A decisions are decisions that you can make in your job. You don't have to particularly tell anybody about it, in terms of mulling it over. You can just make the decision. And for example, customer service representatives on the phone. If a customer needed up to a certain dollar value of extra something, whether it would be freight, unusual freight circumstances, or some kind of price difference. We set limits, dollar limits, and we said, as long as it doesn't go above this level, you can just do it. The B was at the next level, for the same person. The B was, you can do it. You can do it on the spur of the moment. And the way I put it was, but I need you to explain after the fact what you were thinking, and if there's a learning opportunity, you're going to have to put up with coming to lunch with me and explaining that. We never, it wasn't any threat of firing anybody. It was enough, enough of a penalty to go to lunch with me. And then the C decision was, we're sorry, but this is kind of above your pay grade, and you gotta ask your boss about that. And we got to some fairly, within our industry, we got to some fairly high levels. I mean, our CSRs could make decisions on the spur of the moment that cost the company, each one, up to $20,000 with impunity. Which was unusual. I mean, most companies our size, we were about an $80 million company, steel company. Most companies our size wouldn't dream of allowing, a CSR on the desk to make a spot $20,000 customer concession or whatever, But surprisingly, and I didn't exactly lose sleep, but I worried about it a bit early on. But surprisingly, it was rare. Just the fact that everybody knew that they had that available to them, that we trusted them with it. Most of the time, they'd come and ask, and I'd kind of say, well, what's your A limit? And they'd say, I know, but I need to go away. Just do it. So that's what our ABC was. Yeah. And it basically, like the plant managers could spend $1 million without, without any, on their own authority. Yeah.
Was that a B level? The $1 million for the plant manager?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that was, you can do it, but you better be able to explain what you were thinking. And I mean, sometimes it did happen that it seemed like a good idea at the time, but it didn't quite work out that way. And we just said, well, that's a learning experience for you. We didn't have too many of them, but, we had people buying 2 spare motors for big machines, and the spare motors were like, $100,000 a piece. And, 2 of them. And, okay. Yeah. Yeah.
So I have 2. One, about hiring. You said a comment about like the top, or like the leader always is the one that's responsible for the hiring. And how is that scalable? Because, and I'm sure this isn't actually how, whoever owns Ford Motor Company, the factory in China isn't like, hey, we need to go talk to Henry Ford to hire the guy that's going to sweep the floor or whatever. So at what point, do you start to?
Yeah. In terms of team building, like in Plymouth Steel, my direct reports, and there were 9 of them, was the business planning team. So I was responsible for them. In other words, if one of them left, then it was me that primarily had the final decision on who we brought in to replace. Each one of them had their own teams. And to the extent that, obviously you talk to each other, it's not like you're all in silos, but essentially each one of them had their own personal authority to hire and fire the folks in their organization. And so the plant managers, for example, everybody in each single plant fundamentally reported to the plant manager, and he had hire and fire capability, and they delegated all of that through, different shift leaders and the rest of it. So I used to say, and people used to laugh at me just like you guys will probably laugh, the Romans figured out management extremely well. And the way they worked it was that no single person had more than 10 direct reports. So, yeah, all the way down in the organization. Even the centurions who were in charge of 100 soldiers, but the centurion had 10 kind of leaders. Each of them had 9 or 10 people in their organization. And there's lots of empirical work in textbooks and research studies that show that span of control of more than 10 people makes life difficult. I did some consultancy work for an organization a few years ago, and they gave me 3 months to this is a multiple plant, actually multinational organization. And they gave me 3 months to kind of wander around and, look like I was the agent of the devil, and everybody was afraid of me because they knew I was a consultant and they knew that things were going to change, and it's an interesting experience. But at the end of that, the guy who had hired me to do this, the president of the company, he said, well, can you give me, he'd got all these great big organization charts. Like he'd got a great big scroll of organization charts. He'd got a great big scroll of organization charts. So, this guy does this. And he said, what do you think about my organization? And I said, this is after 3 months. And bear in mind, I was Joe consultant, so he's paying me and I'm gone. Like I'm a hired gun. So I got no reason to tell him anything other than what I think. And I don't need a drink to tell people what I think. So I get that from my mom. Yeah. When she was 80, my mom was a very outspoken lady. And when she was 80, Chris and I went to England to help her celebrate her birthday. And one of the guests at her birthday party said, what do you think now you're 80? And she said, now I can tell people what I really think. And Chris said, you've been telling people what you really think all your life. Yeah. So I said, you want me to describe your organization? You've got 5 plants, 2 in different countries, 3 in the States. What does your organization look like? I said, it looks like this. I said, I can't draw enough lines. How many employees have you got? About 1,000. I said, okay, imagine there's 1,000 lines there. What's that? I said, that's you, president of the company. And he said, no, I got this big chart with all. I said, no. I went to this plant here, and, I'm Joe consultant, right? So I don't care. And I'm in the bathroom, and they got no toilet roll. Right. So I just very casually, first person I found, toilet roll. Oh, you need to see him. So I go see the guy who orders the toilet roll. Toilet roll. He said, well, I put in a request for a requisition to the president, and I haven't got it back yet. So I haven't bought any toilet roll. And this was one of the plants in the States. You know what I did? I went to Walmart in my Ford Explorer, and I filled it up with toilet roll from Walmart, and I brought it back, and I gave it to him, and I put in my expenses the following week, which, used to be paying toilet roll. Yeah. So That's what happens, and that's probably what prompts a question about who does what. This was an organization that was a decent-sized organization, and this guy ultimately left. And they actually kept me on, which is pretty scary. And what we did was we split it up into the individual plants. We said the plant managers are not plant managers anymore, they're general managers. And over a 2-year period, we got each plant to be reasonably autonomous. But they could have done, over the years that they were doing it like this, they could have done so much better if this guy had been prepared or had the skill. It's not really a question of prepared. It had the skill and or the willingness to get the skill to delegate. It's very interesting, I think, that when we come back to our Christian faith, we are all indirect delegates of Jesus Christ. Every one of us. We're all at a different stage. But the process for every one of us is very, very simple. You only have to do 2 things in life. Get saved and evangelize. That's it. And we all know that. So this won't happen in the Christian faith. But it happens in business. Sorry for the long-winded answer.
One comment. So I guess the one comment, just because I know a little bit, and you don't have to give like exact details, but the way that you did bonuses at Plymouth, at least, I think is part of the juice that made the ABC decision-making stuff happen. Because, or like I don't know what the right way to say it is, but the like perfect thing in the world is where the guy sweeping the floor at NASA says, and they ask, "What are you doing?" and he says, "I'm putting a man on the moon." Mm-hmm. Like, part of the way that you did bonuses, I think, made that like happen. And and maybe it's just as a kid watching, so maybe I'm mistaken, but my thought was that everybody, if it was the person sweeping the floor, if it was the person cleaning the trash out of the parking lot, the person running the shoe mag in Mexico, every person had a part in, so that person making the $1 million decision, or that person saying, yeah, the company will float the $20,000 for freight, that had some implication back into their own pocket and their own incentives. So if you could, I mean, you don't have to talk a ton about it, but if you could just make that known, because I'm trying to figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, it reasonably straightforward, at least on paper. We took 50% of the after-tax profits, and it was a sub-S company, so definition of after-tax is a little shaky, I guess, because the members of the company, we made sure that the members of the company at least got enough money in dividends to pay their personal income tax liability, because it was a flow-through liability, even though it was a big company. I mean, it was $80 million. But 50% of the profit, essentially, was distributed to everybody on the payroll. And so we'd report profits. I mean, we'd tell them, a lot of companies, especially companies, that size and bigger, unless they're public companies, they prefer not to disclose all of their profitability and all of their kind of financial ins and outs. And I had no problem with that at all. And so we literally, because we'd give that information at quarterly meetings, within a 3-month kind of window, towards the end of the year, each employee could figure out what his bonus was going to be, because we told them the results. We told them where all the money was going. and we kind of evened it out. We did tier the bonuses. So we actually had 3 levels of bonuses, and it was based on the kind of job that they had. But very roughly, everybody, in a good year, everybody ended up with about 30% of what they would consider, if they consider a normal annual salary as $1, they'd get 30 cents on top of that as a bonus.
I just wanted to make a comment because obviously I seen all this stuff happening a little bit, but the quarterly meetings that you had, it always occurred to me that you said this earlier, that you had every person in the company at the quarterly meeting. So nobody was left typing or making an order or whatever. The plant was closed, because I used to sometimes go and man the phones while they had these quarterly meetings. That's like, there was nobody left behind. So it didn't matter what your job was. And attending the quarterly meeting meant that every single person, no matter what their job was, like Jeff said, whether they swept the floor or made great big decisions, was included. So they knew that they were one complete team working towards the common purpose of making this steel be absolutely perfect for the customer. And he's always done that wherever he's worked. And like I said in my introduction, he's made it his business to know people, or to everybody, so he could walk through the plant and say hello and how are your kids doing and how's your sick husband or whatever. Which I've always admired in him, because I've worked for people who don't even know your name, they don't care.
Thanks, Chris. The quarterly meetings, you reminded me that my 2 blue cards are out there and I need them back. Oh, great. Thank you. Because I literally had boxes and boxes of those in English, Spanish, and not so many boxes, but I had 1 box in Bosnian because there was 1 plant. And I could only find those 2, so I was frantic yesterday afternoon saying, I'm going to say I've done these in Bosnian and they won't believe me. I'll sound like it's made up because I can't prove it, So, yeah. Yeah. So I hope this is useful. It may or may not be exactly what Terry and some of you guys expected, but my own sense is a regurgitation of the textbooks isn't really going to be helpful to you, because most of you can read, and yeah. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Roger. And I don't know about you, I had pretty high expectations.
Oh dear.
Yes? Yeah. I had pretty high expectations, and I'm not exaggerating when I say that they were exceeded greatly. So thank you so much.
You need to raise your expectations a bit.
No. So thank you so much, Roger. Thank you, Chris. So any other questions or comments before we dismiss? All right, well, thanks again for coming. And hopefully I'll see you next time around when Ray will be here. This will be the 3rd Saturday of August. Again, remember, if you want to come and pray with us on the 1st Saturday of the month, 9:15 in the missions boardroom. So with that, let's just have a word of prayer before we close. Father, we just are so grateful to you for your goodness and how you're so intimately engaged in our lives and pour into us by your Spirit, through your word, and through each other. Thank you. And we just want to thank you especially for Roger and Chris, and for the things that were shared today, which I'm sure exceeded all of our expectations. Again, thank you. And Lord, we just want you to know that we appreciate you, and we appreciate all that you're doing in and through us, and especially all that you have plans for us to be and to do as we move forward. May your kingdom come and your will be done in the precious name of Jesus. Amen.